This is just like TikTok. I put the glove on and then I film. Nothing's changed. Alright. How are we feeling? Comfy? Alright. Hello everybody and welcome to my first attempt at a YouTube sewing video. If you're coming here from Instagram, you probably already know how much I love and adore Mr. Eugene Fitzherbert from Tangled hit Disney movie. I almost said Tangled the series, but that's primarily why I like Eugene. I made his season 2 outfit last summer because that's just how much I like Tangled the series, but I've realized I have a devastating lack of his movie outfit, which is usually the more popular one, and usually Rapunzel cosplayers will have the movie outfit, and I want to match. So throughout this video, I am going to be working on mainly his jerkin because I have like a yard of leftover wool from this jacket that's like the perfect color for his movie outfit, vest, jerkin, whatever you want to call it. So hopefully throughout this video there will be a little bit of mocking up, a lot of sewing, and a lot of rivets because I also went to Tandy Leather yesterday to get a couple more clasps for the front of his jacket and got all of the implements to make his belts as well. I've never really done leather work before. I got these belts from the Minnesota Ren Fest because I didn't know there was a leather store like Tandy Leather in the Twin Cities, but now I do. So now I'm gonna learn. And you guys are gonna come along with me. Hopefully, if this video works. Let's get into it. First things first, I'm going to do kind of an everything in place, and that includes everything for this cosplay from the shoes all the way up. So I have this shirt that was from Sasha Brous when I did her for Attack on Titan. Pants are from Captain Mal from Firefly, and boots are also Captain Mal and also Sasha. We love multi-use boots. And the wig, of course, I made for my season 2 Flynn Rider. I haven't gotten a chance to use this tiara yet, but I thought it looked pretty good as like Rapunzel's tiara, so we're including it. Then over here I've got all of the raw materials. So I've got the wool, of course, and I've got a couple different options for lining. I am not too concerned about whether they match the wool or not because I'm going to try to make sure they're not visible from the outside, and I don't really want to go out and buy new lining. So I've got a couple options. I've got some batting in case I want to do quilting to get the vertical stripe pattern he's got going on. That might not be necessary because of how thick the wool is, but we'll see. And then I've got all of the leather implements. So I have two veg tan leathered belts of different thicknesses. These are just belt blanks, so I'll have to cut them down to size, dye them, burnish them. I've never done leather dye before. This is a russet, I believe. And if you look really closely at the belts, they're not super smooth finish. They're not like the highest quality finish, so I'm not too worried about screwing that up. I've also got some hemp cording for kind of the cross detail he has along the length of the belt. Got a hole punch to get the holes for that cross detail, as well as this specialty tool that's used for getting a very uniform border around leather pieces, so it'll kind of ride along the edge and create basically a channel. And then over here I've got probably like 100 pack of rivets, fronts and backs, and I've got these closures that aren't quite movie accurate, but they match the rivets and they're pretty close in construction. I actually asked another Flynn Rider cosplayer in the Twin Cities, and he was having trouble finding movie accurate clasps as well, and I told him, well, this is what I'm going to use. So let's talk about what's going on here. I've got like 3 layers of stuff. At the bottom layer, I have my original mock-up from Eugene's jacket from season 2. I have the front piece and the back piece, and I don't actually have the sleeve attached because the jerkin doesn't have sleeves, but I made it out of this like $2 a yard fleece that I have left over from my Homestuck days because it actually works really well as a mock-up fabric for wool because it has a similar weight, similar thickness, similar drape, and that's what you want out of a mock-up. So reusing that because I already know what I want for like the waist proportions and stuff, And the rest of this is for the yoke. I did look up the origin of the word yoke a little bit. I was curious why it's called that and why it is the same as like when you have a big stick across your arms to carry milk pails or whatever. And I guess it's from a word that I'm not going to try to pronounce in Proto-Indo-European that means to join or to unite. So you can kind of think of it as like it's joining the two sleeves on either side. And in general, in clothing, it's used to support the weight of the rest of the garment. Whether that's on the shoulders or actually on like a skirt, you can have a yoke going across your hips. So I thought that was super interesting. It's kind of to support the weight of the garment. So this one I am trying to drape because yokes do kind of an interesting thing. And if you've made a sailor fuku before, you know what's going on. But you have a lot of curves up there. So things you think would lay flat really don't. So you see how it's kind of like coming in at an angle here? This is all one straight line. If I pick this piece of muslin up, you can see how this is all one straight line along the bottom, but when I lay it down over the shoulders, it curves around. And if you look at Eugene's design, his yoke also kind of curves around to a point in the center. So I'm gonna draw on this saran wrap kind of canvas underneath. It's a saran wrap and packing tape. Somebody else has probably already made a video on how to make a saran wrap pattern, but I'm gonna try to draw out the design I want to see if I can get all of the radiating lines on his yoke to line up with the lines on my wool. If we can do it all in one piece, that would be awesome. That would be lovely. That would save me so much bulk, but we might not be able to, so we'll find out. So after sketching and cutting, this is what I ended up with for the yoke. You can kind of see the lines I sketched out to indicate where the stitch lines will be on the front to see how they line up when it's flat. And it turned out it's really hard to see the lines here, but they curve around really nicely in the final piece. So I've got all of the outside stuff cut out now. I have the mock-up piece next to the final outside piece so you can see the line I kind of cut off because I didn't want to waste fabric, and that's going to get covered up by the yoke anyway. So the same kind of case on the back piece as well. But I didn't do that on the lining pieces. I left those as normal because I just wanted to deal with a regular vest when I sew those together. I didn't want to do piecing on both sides. So now we assemble. First things first, I attached the 4 main pieces of the vest together, and here I used clips instead of pins because of how thick this fabric was. It wasn't really a problem for straight line seams, but when it came to more complicated seams, the bulk became a problem. So one of the solutions I came up with was, here I'm running a basting stitch around some of the non-linear edges of the yoke, and by just turning this in once, I was able to stitch it down straight to the vest, and it also looked like a sailor fuku with the contrasting lines. But especially in the back for that curvy seam, stitching it down straight rather than trying to flip it inside out meant that it laid flat. I did think about digitizing a pattern for this, but because I use such a different fabric from most Eugene cosplayers, I did a lot of things very differently. But hey, I never said this would be a tutorial, I just said this would be a vlog. But now I have something that I can physically try on my body. Pro tip for trying cosplays on, always wear the undergarments you're gonna wear with the actual cosplay. Like if you're gonna wear a push-up bra, don't wear a sports bra when you're trying it on. And in my case, I popped my binder on, and while I was at it, I put pretty much the whole cosplay on just to see how it all looks. Oh, okay. There we go. Angles, let's go. You can see the dip in the back. I had to do a little bit of tailoring in the armpit area because this was still tailored for a coat with sleeves. Obviously, I don't need as much motion in the side area if there's no sleeves. So everything I think is fitting pretty well. I'm gonna have to futz with the front for sure to see where the closures end because alas, I'm not built like a Dorito. So next step is gonna be to pattern the sleeve caps and the collar and see where we get. Sorry guys, I did not film how I mocked up the collar and the sleeve cap because my process is more of a guess and check type thing versus I know what this shape is gonna look like, because I really didn't. I kind of knew what the collar was gonna look like because I had already done one of these for Eugene's doublet, and I knew exactly how I wanted the back of the collar to look, so see how that stands away from the neck rather than collapsing in on the neck. It took me a couple of tries to get that right on the doublet. So I had the same kind of issue with the sleeve cap, and since I didn't have a pattern for that, what I did is I took a piece of paper and just kind of shoved it into the sleeve hole and marked out where like the sleeve ended and where I wanted the sleeve cap to end with no like seam allowance or anything. And then I transferred that to a fleece pattern. So this is the first fleece pattern actually, and I had a couple of markings on it because when I actually did the fleece, it didn't work out how I thought it would. It was surprisingly similar to the back of the collar where I put it in and the sleeve cap was kind of angled downward, and I didn't like that. I wanted it to be following the slope of the shoulder pretty close. So what this marking means is I needed more space here. So when I insert this, I had it backwards, oh my gosh. If I want it to angle up, I need it to spread out this way, because right now these two bits are pulling it in and down. So I did that for the next one. When I laid this out and patterned it, I'm gonna throw that away. I put this on the fold and had this at the very edge of the fold, but had a little more space here to add that extra fabric that I needed there. This mark as well, this was just to say, I need more length here. This piece was not long enough to completely cover the sleeve hole. So that's kind of my method for these types of things, where there isn't like a clear-cut pattern block that I have, and using my sleeve pattern wouldn't have worked either because those go like straight down from the shoulder point and I need this to go out. I actually need to do one more alteration because I sewed the collar on and the back looks great, but I noticed the front bits up here are kind of collapsing in on the neck, and I don't want them to do that. I want them to stand pretty straight up. And I noticed when I do that, it pulls out this fabric here. So what I'm thinking is I need to add more fabric, like more space here at the very bottom, and then that will shift everything out and eventually up. So I'm gonna try that one more time, and then I'm gonna transfer to the real fabric.
Rather than using my lining fabric for the underside of the sleeve cap, I did both the top and the bottom out of wool. And this had the additional benefit of being stiff enough to make the sleeve caps stand up on their own. I had originally planned to use some kind of interfacing or maybe horsehair braid or corset boning to get them to stand up, and I would still recommend that if you're using a thinner fabric, but with this wool being as stiff as it worked just fine without any additional structure.
Okay, I know this looks weird. Hear me out. So what I'm doing to avoid having to hand sew the sleeves into like the lining once I get everything assembled is I attached both sleeve layers to the lining. So these are actually gonna flip in like this. They're not gonna be that huge. What I'm gonna do here now is I'm going to take the outer shell, flip it inside out, and I have the collar attached already. This is how other colored clothing items are assembled. I wanted to say vests, but it also applies to button-ups and jackets and other kinds of things, where you'll take the collar and you will sandwich it between the lining and the fashion layer, and it becomes like 4 layers of fabric, which sucks when it's wool, but that traps the collar in place. And then at the end of it, you should be able to flip the whole thing inside out. But you can't do that when you attach the sleeves preemptively because of some weird topology stuff that I'm not going to get into. But yeah, I'm going to attach the top and I'm going to attach the bottom, and I'm going to flip it out like a sideways tube like this way, and then I'm going to top stitch the sleeves and top stitch the front closure, because this was a happy accident actually. I did not plan for this. I cut the front center on the selvage, so this edge is all nice and finished. It's never going to fray. This fabric probably won't fray, but this one much more so I can just flip it over and tack it down with having to hide the extra underneath the second roll and have extra layers of fabric. So We're in the final stretch, guys. We got this.
I get questions occasionally about how to get good at sewing, and the answer is, of course, practice. I've been sewing for about 12 years now, but there is something to be said about having good three-dimensional reasoning and visualization skills, especially with some of the weird shapes you see in cosplay. Being able to see a two-dimensional pattern and understand how it comes together is tremendously helpful when you're assembling something. Now, I also did a frankly ridiculous amount of origami in middle school, and I think that has helped me tremendously because it's another hobby where you're taking something two-dimensional, paper, and making it into something three-dimensional.
So I've got all of the seams together except for the front center, which I'm going to top stitch pretty soon. But I've started marking out where I'm going to do the top stitching for the decorative lines basically, and I've been using tailor's chalk. I tried using an air soluble marker that I've tried using, but it's a little bit too dark for this dark fabric. So I prefer tailor's chalk on like darker fabrics, and especially things like this. The wool does a very good job of holding on to that dust until I kind of wipe it away. Also, by the way, that's a sample of the batting I have in the vest. I have both the front and the back. There's like a total of 4 pieces, basically the same as the lining.
Oops, quick change of pace because some cool Twin Cities cosplayers put together a cosplay picnic, and a friend of mine was wearing her Rapunzel to this picnic, and I wanted to wear Eugene so we could get pictures together. So I quilted the yoke, but I put off the rest of the quilting for now, which was a mistake, by the way. And the only thing I really needed to do to make it wearable was to rivet in the front closure, just so it would close around my body. Riveting is pretty fun, by the way. Just make sure you don't do it at night if you have neighbors.
So I am headed to the cosplay meetup picnic, and I said I was going to bring popsicles, but due to my poor time management skills, I did not get them before heading to the picnic, and obviously I am already in cosplay. So wish me luck getting through Costco in one piece. Okay, so I totally forgot to record the entire meetup because I left my phone in my car, but turned out so well. I even spilled ice cream on the vest, and you cannot see because it just wipes right off with the wool. So I say this is a pretty successful build, and it's not even done yet. So yeah, I did a photo shoot with my friend Peachy who did Rapunzel, and I'm very excited to get those photos back. So yeah, I'm gonna go home and finish the rest of this. Tragedy has struck while trying to quilt the back of this vest. I think the lining was a little bit too short, so when I was starting from the bottom and sewing up, it was getting all bunched up here. I already took out this seam once and brought it down, but I'm gonna have to do it again over here. This is just too much stuff. So I took out all of the rivets on this side and kind of rearranged stuff so it's laying a lot flatter over here, but I still have to take out these rivets. And I've learned when you go online, different places will tell you, oh, you need a power drill to take rivets out. And maybe that's true for metal or leather where you don't want to scratch whatever underneath, but I realized I can just take a staple remover and I can remove the rivets pretty easy. Let's see if I can do it one-handed. Anyway, you get the idea. This works a lot better with 2 hands. So I'm gonna go back in, I'm gonna remove those, and then reattach this thing with top stitching. Yay. Okay, so the vest is finally done. This took way longer than it needed to. I'll talk about this in the final review, but there are some things that would have made my life so much easier on that thing rather than tearing out a whole bunch of seams. So it's done, thank goodness. Now I can start on the even scarier part, which is the leatherworking. Before I do any dyeing or anything, I'm going to get all of the holes punched, get everything cut, because then I can get the dye into those crevices in any holes I punch or any edges I cut. So I have my belts from my other Eugene cosplay. This will give me a guide on how long to cut them as well as where to put these punches for the buckle. So the brown one, this is the waist belt, and the black one is kind of the hip belt, so they're two slightly different lengths. And I'll translate those over to these pieces over here. So this will also be useful for me to know where and how long to cut the hole for the buckle, since you need to be able to move this, I don't know what it's called, I want to call it a tongue, but you need to be able to move this tongue freely to like actually get your belt buckled. So I'm gonna have to cut that as well as all the holes for the rivets there. And after that, there's some decorative carving to do. I looked at the reference images pretty closely, and there's a border kind of going around the entirety of both of Eugene's belts. And I got this tool, I think I mentioned it in the materials section. And then after that, I'm gonna do a whole bunch of hole punching because he also has decorative stitching on his belts. I haven't decided if I'm going to use an awl or if I'm just going to use the smallest setting on my rotational hole punch. I'm leaning towards the hole punch right now because that'll keep it a little bit more even, and then I don't have to hammer the awl and risk like scuffing whatever's underneath my leatherwork, whether that's just my cutting board or my table or my counter. I am renting my apartment, so I don't want to do any lasting damage. So that is going to take a very long time because it's 2 rows of holes along the entirety of the length of the belt. And then I have to go back and stitch. I was going to use hemp cord in those. Tandy Leather recommended I also do beeswax on there so it glides a little bit easier through the hole. So I don't think I'm going to be doing a time lapse for this section because it's going to be very stop and go. I'm going to try to do a lot of that like after work, in the 3 hours I have after work. And yeah, I will give an update when I have more progress. Progress update on the belt. I did manage to get the section that's going to clamp over the buckle done, but now I'm trying to do the decorative stitching punches. They're not very even. We're just going to ignore that. And I've been trying to use my hand punch, and the issue I've been running into is each time I punch, it'll take essentially a core out of the leather, and at the smaller punch sizes, it's just getting stuck in there. So it gets increasingly harder and harder to actually like grip strength punch it through. And I tried using the hammer method with my stitching punch that would keep these a lot more even, and I don't know if it's the leather or I just suck at hammering, but I could not get this all the way through. And maybe that is, I do need an actual quartz slab. Maybe I'm just like a little too skittish to hammer on my plastic cutting board, but this isn't working. This is only working sometimes enough to get all of that done. I noticed if I gave it a rest, I could go back and like get another couple holes punched through before it would clog up again. So I'm gonna try, the first thing I'm gonna try is WD-40. I just like stuck basically the straw up the backside of this punch, and we're gonna see if that loosens up the leather in there and I can get that out maybe. And if that doesn't work, I may just wait to finish this until the winter and it gets a little bit drier out, because one of the theories that was suggested is that when I take the like core sample out of the leather, it's expanding with the humidity, because in Minnesota it's pretty humid and it's like stupid hot right now. So this might all work better when it's dry out. So if my video doesn't come out until like November, this is why. God, 2 of these holes I couldn't even get all the way through. Fighting for my life here. Okay, I got all of the holes punched and I got the belts dyed, and it looks super uneven because I was doing the isopropyl alcohol and the leather dye in small batches, and just kind of wiping it on. So I wasn't very consistent with that, and I have a couple more things to say about that during the review. But honestly, I don't mind the patchiness. That's kind of what it looks like in the movie, and it gives it more of a cartoon character look, even if it's super uneven, especially on the back. So now I was going to go through and add the hardware, but I realized these are super stiff now. This is like a piece of bark. So I went through already once on this belt and I added some leather conditioner. Let me grab it over here. This is the stuff I actually use on my Red Wing boots when they get a little bit too stiff, and it works kind of like hair conditioner, if you can imagine that. It makes the leather more supple, as they say. So I can tell the difference already. I'm gonna do a second coat on this one and probably 2 coats on this, and then we can get down to the hardware.
Origami strikes again, because I didn't actually have a burnishing tool, so I used my origami bone folder, and aside from having to dig all of the burnishing gum out of the holes I'd punched, this was really easy and super satisfying to feel how smooth the backside got once I'd worked it. The stitching was also really easy because I had to punch the larger holes to actually get the leather punch to work, and that meant I had a lot less resistance on the hemp cord, and I didn't even need to use beeswax. So with that,
finally, Eugene is done. At least the movie fit. It took longer than I thought it would because of course it did. It always does. Which is why I never set deadlines for my projects. But I got the vest done and I got the belts done. And I'm very happy with how they turned out. I learned a lot. I do have some, critiques I want to go through and talk about what I would do better next time. Starting with the vest, it was a pain to quilt all of these lines on the front because I had sealed off the top and the bottom when I flipped it inside out because I didn't want any raw edges along the bottom. I was able to basically tack down the front sides, but that's because I deliberately used the selvage on those. I would have had to hand sew the bottom hem. So when I went through, I sealed off the bottom and the top and flipped everything inside out to quilt. All of the layers kind of crept around and weren't laying flat when I tried to quilt them. So I had to go through and I had to separate the yoke and quilt it and put the yoke back on, and it was really painful. I'm not sure I would do anything different next time. Maybe I would just suck it up and hand sew the bottom edge, but what's done is done, and it ended up working out in the end. Now for the belts, that's where I learned the most because I've never done really any leather working before, and certainly not with veg tan leather. So the dye job ended up really uneven, and I'm fine with that. I think it looks fine. Part of the point of doing this particular outfit was because I wanted to have the opportunity to do something less clean. And he's kind of a street urchin at this point, a relatively well-known thief, but he's certainly no royalty, so he can look a little bit shabby. But if I wanted to do a nicer dye job next time, I would just mix one large batch and mix it thoroughly. And maybe I would even do dip dye depending on how large the belt is. When I had looked online, some of the tutorials had big Tupperware containers where they had all of the dye. And that way, if I'm trying to dilute it with the IPA, it'll at least be relatively even. I know because it's supposed to be oil-based, you should be able to do multiple coats and it won't change. But I had some issues, especially with the larger belt on the very end. It got really dark really fast, and I think that's because I hadn't thoroughly mixed the IPA yet when I had started in on this section. So I got a little scared there and didn't try to go over any other parts. What else? I learned that burnishing is actually intended for the edge of a leather piece, not the back side. Apparently, there's Dremel. Anyway, there's a bit you can put on your Dremel, and you can just run it across the edge of your leather, and it'll get a nice rounded and shiny corner. I don't have that, and I didn't feel like going out and getting one, so I just left the edges as is, and I can tell that it's causing problems because the leather is slightly too wide for the buckles I picked out. So in the long run, those might deform a little bit, but I'm not too bothered. I'll know for next time though. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else about the belts. I don't know if I've complained about the punches enough. Like once all the stitching went in, it came together wonderfully. But punching these was such a bear. I did cry. There's blood, sweat, and tears in those holes because I stabbed my thumb real good and I'm not happy about it. But I went online and I tried to find what the deal was with my punch. Turns out, typically, the issue is the punch doesn't have the right taper, so like there's too much friction on the cores you're punching. I also found that if I used the larger punch that I had, it the edge wasn't as sharp, so it wasn't going all the way through the leather, and it was still kind of leaving a little bit connected. So that meant the core wasn't getting stuck in the punch because it wasn't like being removed from the leather entirely, and then I could go remove those by hand, and that was fine. So maybe the answer is I just need a worse leather punch. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this sewing video. This is my first time trying to make something like this, and maybe you learned something from it, maybe not. I learned something from it, and to me that's what matters. But I want to try sharing more of what I know and what I've learned, because I've learned so many wonderful things from other cosplayers in the community, and I want to pay it forward a little bit. So if you liked this video, stick around for more. I will hopefully be making more videos like this in the future, because I'm going to be sewing a lot more in the future, and maybe even things that aren't sewing, who knows. But yeah, also take a look. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. I was going to add like belt holders to the sides, because these kind of slide around funny. But I didn't want to do that till after I finished the belts. So here we are.